we have Michael Hall back. And this is, you're going to talk about how it works, because scopes are new. Scopes, most of us here, how many of you have read about scopes and understand how they're different from apps? Okay, that's pretty good. It's a bold new step, and you're going to talk a little bit about making them as well?
I'm going to talk really about the phone itself, what sets it apart, so scopes as well as the app platform, and convergence in general and why that matters.
Well, this will be exciting because, as Jono said, this is not any OS you've ever seen before.
Yeah.
So thank you, Michael. Take it away.
All right. So to start us off, a question we get a lot of times from people who either don't follow open source or Ubuntu or just haven't had the opportunity to actually see what we're working on is, what is an Ubuntu phone? There's a lot of confusion out there about what it is. Some people have said it's just a shell on top of Android or a custom Android launcher. But really, it's just the same Ubuntu that you're always familiar with. It's the exact same code that runs on the desktop. It's the exact same code that you can run on the server. We've just got it now where it will run on tablets and phones. But under the hood, under the shell of the device, it's all going to be the same software, the same APIs, the same system services, everything that you have become familiar with on the desktop, you will find also on a tablet and the phone. So it kind of works like this. We've got the Linux kernel at the bottom. We've got the Ubuntu platform in the middle, which is the base OS and the services layer. On top of that, we run the Unity 8 shell, Qt for applications, and the application services that they use to interact with the platform below it and the shell itself. And then on top of that, we've got the apps that run, the scopes that run, and the shell that you actually see and interact with. Under the hood, it's what you already know. It's got the same kernel running on all the devices. It's got the same platform services, or at least it will be soon, the same platform services. Right now, there's some things on the phone that haven't made their way to the desktop yet. It's got the same user land tools that you're familiar with, so you can put the terminal on there. You can use sed and grep and everything that you would use on a terminal on the desktop. All your familiar command line stuff is all going to be there. It's built from the same archives, so exactly the same places where you have to get stuff on your desktop or on your server. The code for the phones is coming from the exact same place. We don't have a separate archive for phone stuff and for desktop stuff and for server stuff. It's just one big archive of all of those codes. And then it's going to be the same shell. It's not yet. Obviously, we still have Unity 7 on the desktop. We've only got Unity 8 on the phone. But we're working on bringing those two together so that we can have the new shell that we've developed for the phones and for the tablets working on the desktop as well. And it's going to look and it's going to feel just like Unity on the desktop does right now. It's just going to be the same code. It's a little bit different from traditional desktop or from traditional Ubuntu use in that we can run it on Ubuntu or on Android hardware. And to do that, we've had to include some bits of Android into it. So we've got Android device drivers in the kernel. We've got some specific Android services or APIs that hardware uses to interact with it. And we do that by putting these Android bits in an LXC container on the phone. So you're booting Ubuntu, you're running Ubuntu, but then Ubuntu will talk to this little bit of Android code in a container to actually get the hardware to do what you expect the hardware to do. That's just a limitation of running it on Android hardware. You won't get any of that on a traditional desktop. If at some point in the future we've got phones that are designed first for Ubuntu instead of first for Android, then we'll be able to get rid of that on the phone also. So along the way, we've had to invent some new stuff to make this work. We had to come up with a new display server that would work well on mobile devices, that would replace the traditional X11 that we have on the desktop. We had to come up with a better way of providing applications to the user, something that was simpler, faster, and easier than deb packaging. And we had to provide a safe application experience for the user too, because they're going to be installing stuff that hasn't been security reviewed. So we need to make sure that whatever they install can't do anything bad to them. And in order to make sure that we got a good battery life, taking this desktop and server OS and sticking it on a tiny little phone with a tiny little battery, we had to implement some kind of lifecycle management for apps to make sure that there wasn't something just sitting there running, churning through your CPU constantly and draining your battery. And in order to make updates easier, especially over-the-air updates, if you're not plugged into a LAN or you're not using a good Wi-Fi connection. We needed to provide small atomic updates to the phone, just like Android does, just like iOS does. So we had to implement a way to do that on top of the existing Ubuntu infrastructure and archives. And of course, we had to add stuff to actually make it useful as a phone. So we had to add a way to make voice calls from Ubuntu. We had to add a way to send SMS and MMS messaging from Ubuntu. We needed a way to use cellular data when you were connected to 3G instead of your home Wi-Fi. And we had to have SIM card management, because a lot of phones now have 2 SIM cards, and we needed a way to let you switch back and forth between them and how you use those. So that was all new stuff that we didn't have anywhere already to build upon. Along the way, we also knew that we had to improve the app developer story. Jono mentioned in his talk earlier that the traditional way of developing apps for Ubuntu was really wide open. We didn't say use this language. We didn't say use this toolkit. We didn't even say use this editor. We just said find something and make it work, and that didn't work out very well. So we knew we had to do better with that. We had to provide something that was specific to our platform, and we needed to pick things that we could support and we can make them good, and we can really give a good developer experience on that. So we ended up creating, we improved the developer portal, as Richard mentioned. We spent quite a lot of time improving that. We developed our own SDK, building off of the work that Upstream Qt has done and the incredible Qt Creator IDE. We added a lot of new platform services to support some of the limitations that apps were going to face on the phone. We created simplified packaging, as I mentioned, the click packages earlier, to make that easier for developers. Because when we had people developing apps for the desktop store, the hardest part for them was making packages that could get into the store. It would take weeks or months from when they first submitted a package until they had something that was approved and available for users to download. And that was just a horribly frustrating process for them. It was a horribly frustrating process for us, because we had to go and make sure that these big, complicated Debian packages that could do anything under the sun were only doing the few specific things that we knew were safe. And we had to make sure that the code in these apps was all safe. So we actually had to go through and review the code and make sure it wasn't going to do anything bad. None of that worked out really well for anybody, so we had to fix that. We had to get a better store where people could get apps in fast, not have to worry with all that hassle, because all they wanted was to get their code to their users as fast as possible. And of course, when we were doing all of this, we had an eye towards a converged future. We see a future where devices take on different form factors and different use cases. And we wanted to use the same software for all of those form factors and all of those use cases. And we wanted to be able to switch back and forth between them dynamically. So when we were creating all this stuff, even though our focus was on the phone, we always kept an eye out to tablets and desktops and TVs and beyond that. So why should anybody care about new platforms? We get a lot of negativity when we talk about this. I know the Firefox guys get a lot of negativity. The Yola guys do. Why should anybody care about a new app platform or a new mobile platform? And people say things like, Android and iOS already own the mobile phone market. It's too late. Give up. Go home. But when you start digging into the truth of that, up until 2007, Nokia had a majority of the market share. In 2004, Symbian had 70% of the mobile phone operating system market, which is right about where Android is now. As recently as 2010, IDC predicted that Symbian would still have been the #1 phone operating system as of last year. They said that Symbian would still have 33% market share last year, and that BlackBerry would be the #2 smartphone in the world in 2014. And this wasn't just an IDC fluke either. Gartner, the same year, predicted the exact same thing, that Symbian was still going to be #1. Because back then, Symbian was too big to take on. They were the giant. They owned the market. Nobody else should even bother. But of course, as we all know, what happened in 2010, not long after they made those predictions, Android surpassed Symbian to be the #1 smartphone OS. But that was really only in sales. Symbian still had more phones in people's hands in 2010. And in fact, they kept shipping more phones year after year up until 2011. That was the point where they finally peaked. All told, Symbian spent 6 years as the #1 operating system for mobile devices. Android has only been in that spot for 4 years. So if somebody can unseat Symbian after 6 years, somebody can unseat Android now. And curiously enough, even though everybody always mentions Apple, Apple was never number one. Even before Android came around, Apple never made it to the number one spot. Another thing people like to say is that Android and iOS already do everything that they need. And while they mean this sincerely, what they really mean is that Android and iOS already do everything that they use Android and iOS currently to do. But the truth of the matter is that their use cases haven't changed. In the past 5 years, phones have gotten bigger, they've gotten faster. I looked at the new iPhone 6 specs. It's twice as fast as the iPhone 5. It's 4 times as fast as the iPhone 3. And it is 10 times as fast as the original iPhone. But are we doing anything differently with something 10 times more powerful than we did way back when the first iPhone came out? Our use cases really haven't changed for phones. We pull up apps, we poke at them around, that's it. And the OS is designed around that. That's really all of that Android and iOS support in terms of use cases. In order to use this new, faster, bigger hardware, all this new storage that we've got, we really need to change the use cases. And in order to do that, we have to have a platform that can give you something different. Smartphones have undoubtedly changed the way people approach computers. There was a huge shift in the way people perceived computers and information when they started getting smartphones. Now, mobile phones, I know, Richard, you hit on this earlier, they outnumber desktops and laptops in sales. If you go into a Best Buy, there are now at least as many phones on display as there are laptops on display. There is a huge market there that is just needing somebody to get in there and start doing something. And that's where we see it. We see going forward that people still have a need for PCs. They still need a keyboard to get productive work done. But they like the convenience of having something they can slip in their pocket. And right now they've got this split personality where they've got to switch back and forth between the two. Even if you have Android or iOS, you don't have, except for Brian Lunduke, you don't have Android as your primary desktop. You don't have iOS as your primary desktop. You still live 2 different lives between your PC and your phone. And we think that that's going to change in the future. Hardware manufacturers tend to see that. They're all starting to try and come up with devices that can go between the two. But you need an OS and a platform that can do it also. So why do end users want Ubuntu? Why do consumers want Ubuntu? Why would they want Ubuntu? It really is a new kind of phone. This is something we talk a lot about, and you have to kind of experience it to understand what we mean by it. But it's not just about apps. The foundational layer of Ubuntu for phones and Unity 8 is about content. It's about getting you the content that you want as quickly and easily as possible. And in our view, apps are just one kind of content that you want fast and easy access to. And every kind of content should be on equal footing with apps. So we're going to bring music and videos and online information and local file information and anything else that we can, and we're going to bring it up to the same level of apps. We're going to put it in the same place that apps would be and give it that first-class experience for you. And the way we do that is with scopes. Scopes are a way of surfacing content, both local content and remote content, into the home screens of the dash. They are small little bits of C++ code. They're fast. They don't have to draw their own UI. They just hand off chunks of information to Unity. Unity is responsible for the UI. We provide something that's going to make your content look good by default. You don't have to worry about that. You just have to get us content. And then the user then can take that content, all these different scopes and all the different content that they provide, and they can arrange that into something that works for them. They can turn on the scopes that they like. They can add those to their dash so they're easily accessible with a swipe. They can turn on and off individual sources depending on what they need. So you can have a photo lens, and if you use Instagram, you can have that. If you use Facebook, you can have sources from that. If you use both, you can use them both. You can customize where it's getting information from and what information it's getting and where it's putting it to specifically what works for you. And you can even take that as far as replacing the default home screen with any other scope that you want. So for the Nexus 4, by default, it's the app scope. For BQ, by default, it was the aggregating today's scope, which is really nice if you haven't tried it. But the user can change that. So if somebody a month from now, 2 months from now, comes up with a really nice scope that you want to make your default, you want it to be the one that comes up when you press the Ubuntu button, you can do that just by simply dragging it up to the top of the list, and now it's your new default experience. So you have a lot of control over what your interface is like, and you get to do that without replacing any of it. I know on Android I've replaced my launcher to get custom icons on there. And you have to choose, do I want this launcher with these features or this launcher with these features? You don't have the option to use some from here and some from there. With Ubuntu you do. You can add just the ones you want, and you can add them together. And this really aids discovery because now you don't need to care about where something is. If you're looking for a photo and you don't remember where you took the photo or where you stored the photo, you don't have to go poking around through different apps to try and find out where it is. You just go to the photo scopes, and they're all there, and you just find it there. On my desktop with my scopes, one of my favorite is the Google Drive scope, because now I can just look for a file by file name, and if it's local, it finds it. But if it's a file that I've got on my Google Drive, it finds it there too. I don't have to think and remember where I put this. Unity does that for me. And because we are a content-centric operating system, we really wanted a way to keep your content visible and not layer on bits of Chrome on top of that. So in order to accomplish that, we chose to own the edges of the screen, just outside of the content. That's where Ubuntu controls user input. So we've got 4 edges. We've taken over 3 of them. From the left edge, you get the launcher, which lets you easily switch and open your most commonly used apps. If you drag it all the way across, it'll take you back to whatever you've got set up as your default scope. From the top, you've got access to a bunch of different quick settings, change networks, change your volume, check your battery and your screen brightness, a bunch of different things you can access there. Same indicators that you can get on a desktop. And then if you slide in from the right, you can easily switch back and forth between your running apps, just like you do on a desktop. If you all watched Phil in here, he was constantly flipping back and forth between apps. That's, until recently, that was really hard to do with Android. With lollipops, it's still a little bit difficult to do. But with Ubuntu, it's easy. It's just a quick little swipe, and you get back and forth between it. You will find, everybody who's used an Ubuntu phone has told me this, that they multitask more in Ubuntu than they ever did in Android, just because it's easier and more accessible. And then, of course, we've got this bottom edge. And we specifically decided that since edge gesture swiping was powerful and it was nice, that we wanted to leave this bottom edge for the app developer to do something with. So the Unity shell doesn't have anything there. The app developers are free to use that however they want. You'll see a bunch of the default apps use it to add contacts or make a new call. But you could use it for just about anything. It's really open to the app developer's creativity there. And then as far as the interface itself, we still were making conscious decisions to get out of the way of the content, even when it was a display that we made. So a lot of apps in the scopes, they'll have this big, thick header at the top that takes up a lot of room to display the title. We didn't want that there all the time. It takes up too much room. So if you're on a page that has one of those and you start scrolling up, that's going to scroll out of your way. And you can scroll down as far as you want, and it's going to stay out of your way. But as soon as you scroll up a little bit, it's going to come back and be accessible again. So you can use the whole screen that way. I made this slide back when we still had a bottom toolbar, but that was designed to get out of your way as well. If you compare a Nexus 4 running Ubuntu and a Nexus 4 running Android, you'll see how much more screen space is available to the content of the app itself on Ubuntu. And that was a very specific design decision that we made because we do care about content, and users care about content. They don't care about the OS Chrome going in there. Another decision we made, learning from Android's mistakes, was to give OEMs and carriers a way to customize the user experience without causing fragmentation. Who here has an Android device that's not running Lollipop? Yeah. A lot of the times that's because you don't have an option. You're waiting for whoever gave you the device to give you the updated version of Lollipop. And that requires that they go get the latest version of Android and they pull it in, they merge those changes in with all of their changes and try and get it all to work again. And that's a big investment for them to do. And a lot of the times these companies, they just don't see any benefit in doing that, and so they leave you users with some old version of the operating system, and you're not getting new features anymore. So for Ubuntu, what we did instead is we broke up the operating system into multiple layers, and the installation and the updates come in these multiple different layers. So the OEM is responsible for the hardware layer. They make sure that there's a working kernel and drivers that are going to power their specific device. And they provide that in a system image. And then we provide a generic Ubuntu base OS image. It's going to be the same one that's used on the Nexus 4 and the BQ phone and the Meizu phones. What we provide is going to be the same across the board. And then on top of that, the OEMs again, and now operators, they can add additional scopes to access their services or their product or whatever. They can add additional apps that they want to do to customize theirs. BQ phones ship with additional apps, and some set as default that weren't on the Nexus 4 image. So that lets them add their customization. That lets them differentiate their phones from their competitors' Ubuntu phones. But importantly, all of these layers are developed independently, and they are all updated independently. So when we come out with a new version of Ubuntu, which we're going to this spring when Vivid Verbit is released in April, we're going to have a new upgrade to the BQ phones. And we're going to ship that out to users, and it's just going to get sandwiched between BQ's hardware compatibility layer and their customization layer, and that's all they have to do. They don't have to do anything to theirs. They don't have to do anything to ours. So they can just ship you the very latest Ubuntu every time. Our plan is to keep every Ubuntu phone updated to the latest version of Ubuntu at all times. We're making a commitment to that. Our developer story is centered around that. We don't want developers to have to think, okay, do I have to go support a 2 or 3 year old version of Ubuntu when I write my app and give up these new features? Or do I have to ship this massive compatibility library to get these features on an old version of Ubuntu? We want them to be able to target the latest version of Ubuntu because everybody with an Ubuntu phone has the latest version of Ubuntu all the time. Another thing that we did differently than Android was our permission system. If you go and install an app on an Ubuntu phone, you'll notice that you're not asked to grant any permissions when you install it. You don't have to approve anything. It doesn't say this is what it's going to access. You just click install and it installs. That's it. And it's not because we're giving the apps access to everything. It's because the apps have to ask for it only when they need it. So instead of saying, oh, this flashlight app wants to access your contacts, approve or deny, and if you deny, you don't get to install it. You just install it. And when it wants a contact, it pops up something like this using a service we call the Content Hub. And it says, hey, user, I want to do something with a contact. Now, by now, it should have told you what it's going to do with this contact information. So you can hit cancel, and it gets back no contact, and it's got to handle that. But if it's a valid reason, then you can open up the Contacts app or any other app that provides contacts, and you can say, okay, you can have this one, and this one. And then that's the only ones that that app's going to see. It can't see anything else. It works with contacts. It works with pictures, videos, even generic files using our file manager. So in that way, the user gets complete control all the time over what apps get access to on their phone. And we've done it in a way that most of the time it's no different than just popping up a file dialog and saying open a file. So you don't get an intrusive Windows pop-up that says allow or deny, 10 times an hour. You just say, okay, if you're in the document viewer, say open a file. You get a file picker. You pick the file. It opens it. You don't see that in the background. There's this orchestration going on to give this document viewer access to a file that it never had access to before. So apps can't do anything behind your back. They've got to get your permission, but it's super easy and non-intrusive to give them that. And again, importantly, we're getting ready for a converged future. Everything was designed from the ground up, even going back to the initial designs for Unity, with an eye towards what can we do the same across all devices? What user interface paradigms are going to work across all of these different devices? And if you stick an Ubuntu phone next to an Ubuntu tablet, next to an Ubuntu desktop, you'll see a lot of that already has come through. The launcher is always in the same place no matter what it is. The indicators are always in the same place and behave the same way no matter what. But we also want it to change a little bit. So both the UI and the way they interact is going to adapt depending on what your hardware is. So you don't want floating windows on your phone. You probably don't want it on a tablet most of the time either. But on a desktop, you don't want full screen apps all the time. So everything's designed to change to meet the needs of the specific use case you're using it for as best as possible. And that's going to open up new opportunities for hardware to start to blur these lines. Like I said earlier, hardware companies are already trying to figure out how to do this. There are already people making convertible laptops or convertible tablets or phones that turn into a tablet when you dock them to it. They see this as the future of the market. They just need something that's going to work with it on the software side. And that's where Ubuntu's strong point is. And of course, we're not a new company. We're not a new product. Ubuntu has been around for 10 years on the desktop. We've got a lot of experience with that. We've already got over 3,500 desktop apps available in the archives and the software center. And we have a huge active and dedicated community, which I don't have to tell you because you're here at UbiCon. So you're not taking a venture on something new. We're a proven platform or a proven OS. We're just taking it to new hardware. So what about developers? Why would developers want an Ubuntu phone, or why would they want to target an Ubuntu phone? Again, it goes back to content. On Ubuntu, you get your content front and center with the user if the user wants it. You're not buried behind an app drawer or anything like that. The user can bring it as close up to the first thing that they see as you possibly can. And you get to customize it. You get to make it look the way you want it to look and behave the way you want it to behave. Even though we build the UI for you, we've offered a lot of customization options, so you can choose how big the icons are going to be, whether it's going to be a grid or a carousel or a listing. So you can really customize the look and feel of it to what your content needs to be. And then from there, it's the user's choice how close they want to make it to their default and how quickly they want to be able to access that content. If you're interested in apps, we provide 2 native languages that are really super easy to use and still very powerful. We've got QML, which comes out of Qt. It's a very simple markup language where you just kind of define a UI structure and then you use some JavaScript to glue it all together. It does a lot of the heavy boilerplate work for you. If anyone's ever written like a Java app for Android or anything like that, you know there's a lot of glue code that you have to do. There's a lot of boilerplate and structure that you have to put in. You don't have to do a lot of that with Qt. You really just kind of put components together and they know how to interact together. But if you're interested in cross-platform or you've already got some cross-platform app development going on, we also support HTML5. And we support it as a native programming language. So we treat it as first class. We even, as I talked about earlier, we've got a UI toolkit for HTML5 that looks just like the QML UI toolkit. So you can have an app that looks and feels native even though you're writing it in HTML5 and CSS. And we have also used the Cordova API, which is the same API that PhoneGap uses. So if you've got a PhoneGap app that you're already using to target Android and iOS, it's easy to make that target Ubuntu as well. And in fact, we're now one of the official target platforms for Cordova. So you can just export your app as an Ubuntu app and it'll run. And then of course, if you don't want a native app, if you want to use your remote website and its mobile view as your app, we provide additional ways to integrate that as well. So you can launch it as an app. There are certain APIs that we expose to our browser that remote websites can use to send information to the user without being able to extract information about the user out. And that'll let them add things like information on the launcher counts if you've got new messages in Gmail or something like that. So that's if you don't want a native app, you want to use something remote. We've got some really powerful tools. This is Qt Creator, which we use for the Ubuntu SDK. We've added some additional plugins to it to use the Ubuntu UI toolkit, click packages, and to connect to Ubuntu devices. And we've added a whole bunch of different templates that you can use to get started that really set things up for you. All of these should give you at least a working Hello World kind of app without you having to write any code. So you just start the project, click Run, and you've already got a running app. The store we've made huge changes to, and in fact, the screenshot's updated now. It doesn't look like this anymore. But we knew we had to fix the process. We wanted to bring that lead time down from months or weeks as far down as possible. And actually, we've gotten even farther than I thought we were going to be. We now have instant review and approval of apps. The last time I published something to the store, I uploaded my click package. I went to Google+. I wrote, I've got a new version of my app in the store, and by the time I hit submit, it was already published and available to download. It is that fast. It takes just seconds to get your latest code to your users. And we've got some basic information on there that you can go in and track. We allow selling apps now, which is something new as of like December. So you can sell apps, you can track who's downloading who's got what versions, what country they downloaded it from, and get some historical tracking on that too. So this is an app that I wrote that I've started selling in the store. If you like Reddit, give it a try. We're also an established market. If you're developing an Ubuntu app using the Ubuntu SDK, those can run on the desktop. There are some things that work on the phone right now that don't work on the desktop, but that's just a transitional thing. Very soon, all of those apps that are written for the phone now are going to be usable by users on the desktop, which means that your app is going to be accessible to more than 25 million users right away. So you don't have to wait for the phone to become popular to have an audience for your apps. We have 7,000 downloads every day from Windows users still getting Ubuntu, and it's been localized into over 240 different languages. So again, there's already an existing user base for your apps if you decide to start targeting Ubuntu. So what does the Ubuntu SDK offer you? Again, we offer Qt and HTML5. These are examples of the toolkits running. You can see the sliders look the same, the list view looks the same, the header looks the same. They all look a little bit better now than when I took these screenshots, but they still should look the same. We started out when we developed these toolkits with an idea towards being independent of screen size and screen resolution. So if you've got a high density display, your app's going to look it's going to be the right size on that as it would a regular density display. It doesn't matter if it's big screen or little screen. We've introduced something called grid units, which are not only display density independent, but they're actually viewing distance independent. So you can say, I have a button that's 10 grid units wide. And on a phone, it's going to be like this big. On a desktop, it's going to be a little bit bigger. And if you have it on a TV, it's going to be even bigger still, without you having to change anything in the code. The toolkit provides that for you automatically. So your stuff's always going to be the same size, or I should say it's always going to be the right size, no matter what it's running on.
Now, like with HTML5, can you actually do like you can with the web, where on the phone it shows up one way, then on your desktop it shows up another?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, we're going to get to that because you can do that in QML too. In fact, right here, we're going to get to that. So you can do that on the web already. Web's got responsive layouts mostly figured out by now. So for QML, we had to give essentially the same option. So we let you not just define different layouts, but you can dynamically switch between them while the app is running as conditions change. And you can use any condition that you want to. It doesn't have to be just screen size. So if you want your app to change its layout when a user plugs in a mouse, you can do that. It doesn't, even if it's running on the same screen on the same device. When you've got a mouse, your interaction is different than when you have a touch screen, and your apps can adjust to that. This is an app I love to show off. This was written by one of our community core app developers, and he's using multiple conditional layouts nested inside each other, inside different components, to make it look like this. So as you start out with a phone, you've got just these big icons showing. As you go up to tablet size, not only is it going to show you more of those thumbnails, but it's also going to show you this little sidebar to help you switch back and forth between things. And then if you go up to a little bit bigger sizes still, that sidebar is going to expand even more to show you more information. And that's working right now. That's in the store. You can try that out, run it on a phone or on a desktop and see this in action. It's really, really amazing to see changing live because he's added. It's called Flashback. Yeah, and he's added animations in there too. So not only does it like change where things are, but they slide out nicely, and it's amazing to watch. We've added a bunch of platform services and APIs for you. We've got Oxide, which is a Chromium-based component that lets you embed a web view in your app. This is something a lot of Android users or a lot of Android apps do. They use the WebKit widget to put HTML5 content inside of a native Java app. So you can do that with this, and we give you all of the power of Chromium. So the rendering engine, the CSS, the JavaScript, everything that's in Chromium, you would be able to get inside your app. We have a download manager, which lets you hand off long-running downloads. So if you know that you've got a big file that you want to download and do something with, instead of your app doing the download, you just pass that URL to the download manager and you say, download this and tell me when it's done. And the user can at that point close the app, or the system can close the app to free up resources. And when that's done, it's going to give a notification to the user that it's done. And then they click a button and it'll pop the app back up and it'll tell the app that it's ready, and it just picks up where it left off as if it had been managing the whole thing all along. And to go along with that, we've got the Content Hub, which I talked about earlier. This lets you share content back and forth between apps. You can share all kinds of content with it, links, images, videos, files, all kinds of stuff. And again, it all goes to the user. It gets the user's approval so that apps don't have access to anything that the user hasn't already decided to let them have access to. We've got the U1 database, which is a schemaless database. It's like CouchDB or MongoDB, in that you don't have to define columns and data structures. You just kind of throw in structured JSON into this, and it'll track it and it'll let you query it. And it integrates really, really nicely with QML too. So if you have a U1 database, you can just say, give me, here's a query, display that all as a list of widgets, and it takes care of all that for you. You don't have to make query commands and pass data back and forth in your own code. QML does all of that for you. And U1DB will also sync through canonical servers between different devices. So if you have a list of users' data stored inside your app on the phone, you can have that synced to your same app on the desktop automatically. And we've got online accounts, which gives you a nice central storage place to store credentials. Storing credentials safely is always a difficult task for apps. So we've provided a central place for that that's user managed, and the system secures it to make sure everything's safe there. And apps can ship their own providers for that now. So if you want to create an app for a new remote service, you can use that to give them a way to store the credentials. And then other apps can use the same credentials at that point to connect to the same service and do something else with it. So a lot of apps and scopes will, in fact, use the same account in the system to access that data. And we've got something called the Media Hub, which lets us hand off media files to a background service to play, so that we don't have to keep the music app running and taking up CPU to play a file. It can just hand off that file to the background service, and then we can shut down the music app at that point, so that it's not using any CPU, it's not using any battery, and it's just the Media Hub that's playing that. Yep.
Are there APIs or perhaps plans for APIs for in-app purchases? I know that's very popular with a lot of people.
Yeah, there's been talks about it. There's nothing stopping somebody from using whatever they're currently using, but we don't provide anything at a platform level yet for that, no. All right, so if you're interested in developing for an Ubuntu phone or for Ubuntu desktop's future, where do you go to find more resources? The number one place to get resources for development is the developer portal. It's at developer.ubuntu.com. We have spent 2.5 years now improving this developer portal, making sure that we had all the information you needed. We stripped out all the information you didn't need or that was confusing. We updated the theme of it. It's now mobile friendly. You can go to developer.ubuntu.com on your mobile phone, and it looks nice, and you can navigate it easily. We've integrated all of our different APIs in there so that you can go and find them and learn how to use them. They cross-reference each other, even when they're coming from different sources. So we've got some stuff from upstream Qt. We've got our own Qt docs. We've got HTML5 docs which are coming from a completely different docs format, but they're all being imported into the same website. They're all being formatted to look the same. So it's not this disjointed experience that we used to have. Now it's all on the developer portal. So everything you need to know to write an app or to write a scope is going to be on here. We also have a design portal that the design team runs, and they've got a section on that devoted to apps, where they go over the different UI toolkits, design patterns on how to use them, how not to use them, how to make them work together. So that's at design.ubuntu.com/apps. They just last week or the week before published a huge update to this to incorporate all of the changes that have been going on at the platform level and the UI widget level. So that's all new now. You can go to Ask Ubuntu. Ask Ubuntu is a great resource for all kinds of things Ubuntu related. If you have any kind of a question, you can go there. We have a specific tag for application development. It's conveniently application-development. So if you have a question about it, ask your question here, tag it with that. We've got a lot of community people and a lot of canonical people that pay attention to it and get you answers and get you the information that you need. It's really a great resource. And of course, we've got several different online communities you can be a part of. We have an app developer community on Google Plus that has over 7,000 members now. It's very active. There's a lot of helpful people on there. We've got a Facebook community, which has got a whole bunch of people who are following it. Less interaction on Facebook than Google Plus, so definitely be on Google Plus. It's better. We're on Freenode IRC in #Ubuntu App Devel or #Ubuntu Touch. Both canonical and community people, again, there pretty much 24/7. If you have any questions, you can get some live support there. And of course, we've got two different mailing lists. We have Ubuntu App Devel at list.ubuntu.com and Ubuntu Phone at list.launchpad.net. So those are two different hosts. Make sure you get that right. All right, so what do you do next? Where do you go from here after George's talk? Where do you go to get started with this? You should go to the developer portal, to the Start section, and learn how to get the Ubuntu SDK. If you're running Ubuntu, it's really easy to get. You just add a PPA so that you get the latest. You do an apt-get update. You do an install, and then it's there. If you're not running Ubuntu, if you're running an Ubuntu derivative, I know somebody's got it working on Elementary. I don't know if anyone's got it working on Mint yet. No one's told me, but I've seen someone get it working on Elementary. These instructions should still work for Ubuntu derivatives. It'll work for different Ubuntu flavors like Kubuntu and Xubuntu just fine. If you're running something that's not Ubuntu, easiest thing right now is to get a virtual machine, put Ubuntu on it, and get this. And in fact, somewhere on the developer portal, Daniel Holbach has hosted a virtual machine image that already has all of that in there for you, so you can just download that and start running it. Once you have the SDK, you should go and write your first app. Go to the apps section, go to the tutorials, follow along. It will get you not just a Hello World app, it'll get you something actually useful so that you understand all the different mechanisms that are going into it and how they work together. And you can go from there to make the actual app that you want to make. Or if you're not interested in apps necessarily, but you want to get content on the phone, you can go to the Scopes section of the developer portal and follow the tutorials that we have there that will walk you through getting a useful scope. We've got a SoundCloud tutorial where it'll actually go and fetch stuff from SoundCloud and display it nicely. We also have app development schools that we're working on. We've got some content online for people who are experienced app developers who want to give kind of tutorial lessons to people in their area. They can go get resources from us there. I've hosted one. Some of the other people on my team have hosted some. And we're trying to get more community people to help spread that out a little bit, because there's only so far that the 5 of us on the community team can travel in a year to give these. So that's the Ubuntu Phone and the Ubuntu Phone platform. Are there any questions on it? Yes. Do you have?
Was wondering, I know BlackBerry has it. They have like a Android emulation to try to get some more apps in there. Was there anything similar to that, like that Ubuntu was going to do, where you can emulate Android applications?
We had talked about it, and what it all boils down to is we can either be a really good Ubuntu platform or we can be a really bad Android platform. So we decided that we were going to focus our efforts on making the Ubuntu platform good instead of just being another way to launch Android apps.
Well, I mean, would there also be room for like a company to actually create an Android emulator to run, as an Ubuntu app, but then run the Android?
Somebody could.
They would do a layer separately.
Yeah. The problem is, though, that that's not going to converge across different form factors because it's not going to be able to give you a nice desktop interface. It's
Yeah,
not
I
gonna have
understand that,
access
but it's
to-
just sort of the go-between, get people to come
yeah,
over from the
it's
other
possible,
side.
but we didn't think we would be able to give a good user experience that
Yeah,
way,
okay.
so we haven't invested in it.
And even if it was perfect, being an OS2 user in the past, right? OS2 ran Windows apps
Yeah.
better than Windows, so what happened? Nobody wrote OS2 apps.
Right.
And then,
Yeah.
so that's just as, even if we were awesome at doing Android apps, that's also just as dangerous if you're trying to build a platform.
Yeah, and Yola's done this. Yola has actually gone and purchased an Android compatibility layer for their phones, and I think they're struggling now because of that to get people to write native Yola apps. Because if you already have an Android app and that Android app's already available to Yola phone users, why make a native Yola app?
I have a question related to that, though, about emulators. The Android emulator is a great idea because it lets us simulate the device without having to load on the device.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've used it, you know that it really sucks. Is there an emulator for Ubuntu Touch? And if so, does it work better than Android?
So you have two options. You have an emulator that works like the Android emulator. In fact, I think it's based on the Android emulator. And that will let you run whatever version of the phone is the latest on that and test your app on that. But if you are on the same version that you are targeting with your app, if your desktop's on that same version, you just run it on the desktop. As a native desktop app, you size the window to about the size. It's super fast that way. You don't have to wait for things to copy over to the emulator to load. So for development like that, if you're already on the same version of Ubuntu you're targeting, then that's the way to go.
So the mobile version, Ubuntu Touch, follows the same versioning as desktop Ubuntu?
More or less, yeah.
So 15.04 coming up soon.
Yes.
What's the release date for 15.04? A lot of us are anxious.
April.
April, okay.
Because it's 04.
Well, I think there might be a day that it gets released too, but anyway.
General rule of thumb is I think the last Thursday or second to last Thursday of the month, something like that. Yeah, it varies really depending on how stable it is.
Okay, so that version is the version number of Touch.
Yes. Yeah. So right now, the BQ phones shipped with 14.10. So they're still on Utopic. At some point after Vivid is released, or right at when Vivid is released, they will get upgraded to 15.04.
Yeah. So, what of the popular apps on the other phones, the iOS and Android, are on Ubuntu, and the ones that aren't, what does it take to get them there?
So for things like Facebook and Twitter, we've got their mobile web version. That's what they want us to do. Okay. We had initially talked about using the Facebook API to make a native app, and we went to them and said, hey, we want to make you a native app for our phone. And they said, no. Just point them to the mobile website. That's if you want to use Facebook trademarks at all, point them to the mobile website. That's it. Twitter's the same way, but Twitter's actually got a really nice mobile website. It works really well. The one app that people keep asking for is WhatsApp. And if you've followed WhatsApp, you know how hard it is to get something from them. So there's a bunch of third-party WhatsApp clients that people use, even on Android, that got shut down and their users got banned because they don't want anybody using third-party apps. And they don't want to provide first-party apps except for the limited set of devices that they want to run. So I've got a Nexus 7 tablet running Android. I can't get WhatsApp on that because WhatsApp doesn't want tablets. They only want phones. So that's the one that everybody wants, and it's probably going to be one of the hardest for us to get.
What about like Instagram, Snapchat, some of the other ones that maybe aren't as popular anymore, but they definitely have their...
We've got a scope for Instagram, so we can pull your Instagram photos and we can integrate them in the photos.
Okay.
I don't know if we've got any agreement with them to get an app to actually take the pictures and submit them to it, other than just using their mobile website. We do have Telegram, which if anybody uses that, it's a really great messaging platform. It's a great alternative to WhatsApp, and unlike them, they really like third-party apps and lots of different platforms. So we've got a native Telegram app that takes full advantage of Ubuntu. You get notifications from them even if the app's not running. It's a really nice experience. And then for BQ, we've actually got Cut the Rope official support from them. Zeptolab, I think it is, that makes them. So we've got both a free version and a paid version that's got all of the levels on that from them in the store now.
I'm not allowed to go home unless I get the answer to my wife's question from you.
Okay.
And that is, will there be a scope for Pinterest?
Does Pinterest have an API? I believe so. Then yes, there will probably be a scope for Pinterest. In fact, if anyone wants to make a Pinterest scope, there's somebody who wants one.
There's at least one user chomping at the bit. Yes, indeed.
All right.
To replace like Skype or FaceTime?
No, it wouldn't surprise me if we get a Skype app, though. They've actually been very good, even after being bought by Microsoft. They've been good about supporting Linux desktop, so it wouldn't surprise me. I think, if I remember right, they just rewrote in Qt also, so that should make it a really easy port for them.
Any other questions?
All right. We should probably make this the last one, so George's got all his time.
Is there a Mumble app?
I don't think so, no. That would be another one that I'm sure people would get a lot of use on. I know a lot of people in the open source community use Mumble.
Well, Michael, thank you for handling 2 great sessions in a row here.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.